Hello and welcome to Grin Reviews. If years of watching movies has taught me anything, it's that every hero needs a catharsis. Whether it be the minds of Moria and your Frodo Baggins, or it be the Chamber of Secrets and your Harry Potter, or even if it's the Death Star and your Luke Skywalker, or if it's Dark Chambers and you're on the Atari 2600.
Dark Chambers is one of the most impressive and amazing video game experiences I've ever undertaken. For about 3 minutes, and then unfortunately it becomes one of the most monotonous experiences I've ever undergone, video game or otherwise. You see, not unlike sitting in the waiting room awaiting an invasive doctor's checkup and quickly realizing that the 3 magazines sitting on the table in front of you, while initially seeming vaguely entertaining, on a closer inspection reveal themselves to have little enough content to warrant a pamphlet, let alone 3 magazines, and in the long run fail to do anything of note to stave off the ever-encroaching boredom. Yes, indeed, Dark Chambers is unfortunately the worst kind of bad game. It is, as I've just stated, a boring game, and my gosh is it boring. I suppose out of all the games I've played so far, it is most similar to Berserk and Halo 2600. However, unfortunately, unlike Berserk, Dark Chambers is extremely, excruciatingly slow-paced. And furthermore, unfortunately, unlike Halo 2600, Dark Chambers has no real sense of progression and no satisfying ending. The game pits you, an Indiana Jones-style character who has let himself go a little bit, against an array of alphabetically ordered chambers which, as you might well have guessed from the title of the game, are relatively darkened. Much like Berserk and Halo, you can shoot a weapon in various directions, and quite similar to Halo, you can find a couple of upgrades to your weapon, a shield, and keys in order to unlock doors. Which might leave you wondering what is the exact issue with the game, because so far it sounds pretty darn good. Well, you see, the problem is that when it comes to difficulty curve, there is none. Unlike Berserk, which has its enemies becoming faster shooting and moving with every new room you move into, in Dark Chambers, they really do not change at all from the first screen you're on, regardless of how many more rooms you go into or how many further chambers you descend to. Occasionally a new enemy is introduced, but that new enemy is just the exact same as the old enemy with a new skin layered on top of one of the previous ones. Essentially, it means they take one more shot to kill, but are no more difficult to do so aside from having that little bit extra piece of health. Speaking of which, I cannot help but think that the layered system of the enemies is just utterly bizarre. Rather than there just being 5 different enemies in the game, the Grim Reaper, the Wizard, the Ghost, the Skeleton, and the Zombie, there's basically just one enemy that gets Russian dolled on top of each other. You shoot the Reaper, it becomes the Wizard, you shoot the Wizard, it becomes the Ghost becomes the Skeleton, and the Skeleton becomes the Zombie. Not only is this a really strange way of doing the bad guys in the game, but also the order really doesn't make much sense. I just don't understand how a ghost can die and become a skeleton, and a skeleton die and become a zombie. You would think if anything the order should go wizard, zombie, skeleton, ghost, because I just can't imagine how killing a ghost could produce a skeleton, and then killing a skeleton would produce a zombie. I'm not sure where the skeleton is hiding within the ghost, and I'm really not sure where the zombie is hiding within the skeleton. You should surely be able to see the flesh of the zombie poking out through the skeleton, and I'm just saying from a conservation of mass perspective, this Russian doll enemy setup really doesn't make much sense. Further, as I mentioned earlier, they don't become more difficult to kill as the game goes, which becomes even more of an issue because not only are you getting better at killing them, but you do, as I mentioned, also find upgrades, which means that the already not difficult to kill bad guys become even less difficult to kill. In fact, at no point when playing this game have I ever died due to the enemies. No, in fact, instead, I've died due to a much more annoying issue with this game. You see, this game has death blocks and poison, where if you mistakenly pick up the poison rather than the health, you lose some of your health, and if you accidentally step on a death block, you'll also take damage. Now, on the surface, this mechanic might sound like a fine addition because it's just going to make you pay attention to what you're doing and play the game a little bit more carefully. However, there is a major issue with the death blocks and poison in the way, or more accurately, in the places that they spawn. You see, the death blocks and poison appear more often than not when you kill an enemy spawn point. And the problem with this is that each alphabetically ordered chamber in the game is set out like a maze. Quite simply, you enter the chamber, you have to find the door, and more often than not, to get to the door or to even make the door appear, you have to kill spawn points you find across the length of the maze. Now, the problem with this is that sometimes these spawn points appear in areas of the maze that you must simply pass through in order to continue with the game, which becomes a serious issue if, when killing the spawn point, it drops a death block. It's not an uncommon occurrence when playing this game that you just have to take the hit if you want to continue playing, which becomes an especially dangerous thing later on in the game where potions are far less common, and if you are forced to take a hit several times in a row, you're going to find that you've reached a completely unavoidable and extraordinarily anticlimactic game over. You'll be staring down a death block with the knowledge that you've got no health and there's no more health available in the game, and you've got no other option than to just throw yourself into the death block and call it a day. At one point this happened to me 1 hour and 3 minutes into the game, all the way down in Chamber W. It was extremely disappointing to be so close to letter Z after being bored with the gameplay for over 45 minutes and realized that the game had positioned me into a situation where there was no way I could continue. However, after spending an hour watching A to W go past on the screen, my interests were piqued and I just had to know what awaited me beyond door Z. And so I went back into the game, spent another hour and 7 minutes playing through it, got all the way to the end of Chamber Z, and it just took me right back to Chamber D. I don't really understand that. If anything, if not a victory screen, I expected it to take me back to Chamber A, but make it more difficult. But no, an hour and 8 minutes in, Z goes to D, and the game just goes on. So I suppose what I'm saying is that in death, the game is extremely anticlimactic and disappointing. And in victory, the game is extremely anticlimactic and disappointing. And so in closing, Dark Chambers is a slow-paced, extraordinarily boring game with absolutely no payoff. And so since life is too short to play boring video games, I highly suggest you head down to your local video store and pick up a copy of a better game, maybe Space Invaders or Missile Command, for the Atari 2600.